Welcome to Irresistible. You ignite your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Karen Seltz, also known as the Uncensored Self-Love Coach. I'm so excited that you've joined today. I love this topic. We're going to talk about unconditional love, both giving and receiving it, why it's important to do it, and how you do it. And I love the foundation of what this creates and what it created for me. And I'm so excited to share it with you. So if you are new to me, there's really only three things that you need to know. The first one is that if you have a higher purpose, a deeper calling, just know that if you haven't stepped in yet, I've been in your shoes and I'm still on my journey. More unfolds every single day as to what that I'm called to do, and I just do it. So just know that I'm on the journey with you. Second thing you need to know is I consider my greatest superpower to be that of a divine mirror. And what I mean by that is I'm able to see people not as they see themselves, but in their highest, in their godliness, their divinity, using their gifts and sharing them with the world. And I'm able to reflect that back to people until they see it for themselves. And then they finally go, yes, I get it, finally. And the third thing you need to know is I am uncensored in my approach. I am willing to go wherever I'm called to go, say whatever I'm called to say, and do whatever I'm called to do to get you to a breakthrough or whatever it is the divine has in store for you. So let's dive in. Oh my gosh, I love this topic. So many years ago, I'm going to say like 10, 11 years ago, I stumbled across these meetings that were based on a book called Real Love, and it's by the author Greg Baer, B-A-E-R. And what Greg Baer says is that most of us growing up didn't receive unconditional love from our parents. And many of us will argue that and say, yeah, my parents loved me. And they did. They loved you the best they knew how. They really did. But what he says is that anytime our parents were angry at us or disappointed in us, all we heard was, I don't love you. And in my case, it's like, you're not enough. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that. The not enoughness, you don't matter, you're not good enough, those kinds of messages. So in my case, I started to try to be perfect to earn love and also to avoid being hit, because if I wasn't perfect, I would get hit a lot of times. And I did not like that. So I did my best to avoid it. So many messages coming in were, you're not good enough. If you're not perfect, I'm not going to love you and I'm going to hurt you. So in the absence of unconditional love, which he defines, Greg Baer, as caring about the happiness of another person without any concern for what you're going to get back. So it's not like you're doing something for someone so that they'll do something for you. It's really, how can I make a difference for this person? How can I support this person? And not even receiving, not even being willing to receive anything back in that moment, because it makes it an exchange. It makes it a transaction. So there are lots of things I've learned, and this is one of the foundations of who I am today. So we have these support groups, and the purpose was, if you were the speaker, to tell the truth about yourself. And we're going to get into what we were telling the truth about, but it's basically our behaviors. And it's the behaviors that don't work, really. It was learning to tell the truth about those. And the group would then, in turn, hold space, love you, accept you exactly where you were. And Greg Baer says they loved you unconditionally, warts and all. So even when you have warts, or you're not perfect, you don't have any makeup on if you're a woman, people will hold space for you, and they have the capacity to love you no matter what. And here's the kicker: until you're willing to tell the dirty, ugly, raw truth about yourself, you can never really feel loved or accepted, because there's always this voice in the back of your head saying, well, yeah, sure, they love and accept me now, but what if they knew this about me? They would run, they would reject me, they would leave. So the premise is, you tell all the truth. You tell the stuff that you You vowed you would never tell a living soul. You would take it to the grave with you. That's the kind of things that you would tell in these meetings. And when you did that, when I did that, I should say, there was this immense freedom. Like, oh my gosh, I thought this was the worst possible thing I could say. And these people are not throwing stones at me. So I'm going to give you an example. So I had gone to a couple of these meetings and I told very surface level truths, ones that didn't make me look too bad. And the host of the meeting at my second or third meeting said, okay, great. Now tell us what you're really afraid to tell us. I'm like, oh crap. So I remember like taking a deep breath, and I was so scared because at the time I was married and I was acting out sexually in an addictive way. So I remember like I took a deep breath and I thought like this went through my head in a matter of seconds or maybe 1 second, like, oh my gosh, it was a group of women. These women are going to like throw things at me. They're going to beat me up in the parking lot. They're going to call me names. They're going to reject me. Essentially, I'm going to get hurt physically, mentally, emotionally. I'm going to get hurt. So I remember like I looked down at the ground and I'm like, okay, I'm going to let them put their money where their mouth is. So I'm looking at the ground. I'm like, I sleep with married men. And I waited. I kept staring at the ground. I kept staring. I kept waiting. And those feelings, like those daggers, like, oh gosh, stone her. I didn't feel any of that. So finally I got the courage and I looked up and I looked around the room. And all I saw in the faces of these women was compassion. And I'm like, what? Where am I? Like the Twilight Zone? What is this? And that was the beginning of my journey. And what the beautiful thing is it opened up the space, because that was really freaking vulnerable. It opened up the space. And this other woman said, I had an affair 10 years ago and I've never told anybody, and it's been eating me alive. And someone else said, like I stole from my church and I've been carrying that. I've been afraid to tell anybody. And it opened up this beautiful, loving, authentic, vulnerable space for everybody because I had the courage to tell something that vulnerable. So that's what's available when you're with the right people. I'm not saying like dump everything on everybody. You get to feel out your audience. Like, is it safe to tell this? And sometimes you just got to jump. You got to take a risk. If it's somebody that you think loves you, you get to tell them, because otherwise you're always on the hook. You know what I mean? Like you're always thinking, well, if I tell them, what's a reaction going to be? If you're afraid of how they're going to react, then you get to tell them. And it's scary. It's really scary. So I'm going to say practice with some people that are practiced at offering unconditional love. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go into this. All right. So how and why to love unconditionally. So Greg Baer, this author, he defines real love, which I will also call unconditional love, as unconditional, or as about caring about the happiness or well-being of another without concern or thought of what you might get back. Because if you're thinking like, I'm going to do this in order to get something, I'm going to stop share for a second. That's a lot of times because you are empty. You don't feel loved yourself. So the first step to this is really getting loved up. So find somebody or 10 people, 10 different people that have capacity to love you no matter what. Now, I'm not saying they have capacity every single time you reach out to them, but they have capacity. And how I begin these phone calls, or I'll send a text like, hey, I'm feeling very, very messy and vulnerable. Do you have capacity to hold space for me? So I ask them, do you have capacity to hold space? Because it's not personal. And if I don't have capacity for somebody, I will just say that. I'm sorry, this isn't a good time for me. I don't have capacity. If I'm in my own, what I call a shitty diaper, if I'm feeling sorry for myself, I'm not going to serve somebody else because I'm empty. So anytime we are empty, alone, or afraid, we get to receive love. We get to reach out and say, hey, I don't feel lovable right now. I feel really empty. I feel down. I feel afraid, whatever it is we're feeling. We get to call somebody and tell them that. But first, ask them if they have capacity, right? Because we want people to be at choice. So if usually you show up and you're chipper and you're like, the fair weather, the friend that's always happy, don't just like call somebody and say, hey, man, do you like, I need support and dump on them. You get to ask them first if they can handle it, because otherwise they're not a good audience and it's intrusive. It's like vomiting all over somebody. It's like icky, right? Like you want to get it off. If somebody didn't have permission, they do that to you. So here's the thing too. Anytime we are feeling empty, alone, or afraid, when we think about an interaction with another person, all we can see when we look at them is, what can they do for me? Can they make me feel better? Can they get me out of this hole? What can they do for me? Or if we're afraid, what can they do to me? And we want to protect ourselves. Like, if I tell them this, are they going to reject me? Are they going to leave me? So what can they do to me? What can they do for me? So you want to make sure you find some people that have capacity to love you. And for me, that magic number was 10 different people, because I would call somebody. If they didn't answer the phone, I would leave them a message, say, this is what's going on for me. By the second or third one, after not very long of doing this, I would have coached myself into feeling lovable and into seeing my part in whatever I was feeling. Like, oh, I have a choice here. But I didn't start there. I got to tell the story a little bit, like, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. And after doing that, like I said, a couple of times, I would usually feel like 100% better. If I didn't feel better, I kept calling people until somebody answered, or until I left the message enough times. And I didn't leave the exact same message. I didn't tell the same story over and over. That's going to reinforce the same brain connections, because that's victimy. And we'll get into that in a second. So it's important to find people that can support you. Let's go back to the share. All right. So what is the opposite of real love? This is amazing. I love this term. So what Greg Baer calls it is imitation love. And I had a spiritual mentor. She would call it a substitute for God. And I love that, because if we have this hole inside, we are constantly trying to fill it. And it takes a lot. And once we fill it, it's like there's a hole in the bottom. It just drains right out. So we have to keep filling it, keep filling it. Whereas real love, it lasts. It might fill you up for an entire day if you get 5 minutes of somebody truly seeing you right where you are and accepting you. You don't need to be any different. So there are 4 forms of imitation love: power, praise, pleasure, and safety. I love this so much. Okay, so when I was a sex addict, I got all 4 of those forms of imitation love through acting out. Power, because I would go after people that shouldn't want to be with me, i.e., married men. So I felt really, really powerful when they said yes. And it filled me up. It got me high, honestly. Praise, oh my gosh, you're so much better than my wife. Oh, that makes me want to vomit now. But I used to hear that, like guys would say that to me. So I got praised for it all the time. Pleasure, well, that goes without saying. I liked it. It was fun. Felt good. And safety. Now this one's interesting, right? Because you wouldn't think I would get safety from having sex with other people's husbands, but I did, because I had this core belief that I wasn't lovable unless men wanted me physically. So as long as somebody wanted me, I felt safe. I felt like I mattered. I felt lovable. Now, to my logical brain now, that makes absolutely zero sense. I mean, there's no security in being with someone else's husband. If I wanted security, why didn't I just be with my own husband? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to. A lot of these beliefs were formed when we were young, and we carry them into adulthood, and they make no sense. So don't try to analyze it. It doesn't have to make sense. All right. So we talked about these behaviors. They're called getting and protecting behaviors. And these are the ones we use when we feel empty, alone, or afraid, or unlovable. So getting means I want something, I need something, I don't feel whole, and you must give it to me, and I will fight and claw until I get it. And protecting means don't hurt me, don't judge me, don't whatever. I'm afraid. So one is lack. Getting is when you feel like you're lacking or you need something, and protecting is when you're afraid. So these are 5 different behaviors. It's lying, attacking, acting like a victim, clinging, and running. And I'm going to go into all these in detail because just on the surface, you're like, I don't lie. Well, wait till you see what it looks like. All right. So lying, that can look like bragging, false praise, like when you're telling somebody, oh my gosh, it's so great that you did that. That's amazing. Not being responsible, which a lot of times is looking outside. It's also blaming people. So when you're not being responsible for anything in your life, that can be lying. So you're putting it outside of you. Wearing a mask or being inauthentic. And that can include always having to look perfect before you go out, or when you go to certain places, you're dressing like the people there, even though you don't like it. It's wearing heels when they're killing your feet and you're like, damn, I really don't want to wear these. Just anything that's not authentically you. People pleasing. So doing things that you don't want to do, things that are a no. They're like, your body's like, oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this, blah, 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 but I have to. I feel like they're going to be mad at me. They're not going to like me anymore if I say no. Only telling people the good or bad things about us. So some of us go one way, some go the other way. We minimize our mistakes, for example, or we tell only parts of the story or versions of the story that make us look good. Or if we're into the victim thing, the parts that make us look bad. So lying can come in all those different forms. Attacking, this one's interesting. So it could be anytime you're angry at somebody or irritated. When you feel hurt, that's an attack on somebody, and we do it unconsciously. So what I want you to hear is this stuff is below your conscious level of awareness. So do not beat yourself up for this. It's bringing it up to the surface so you have a choice. So feeling hurt, a lot of us do this to manipulate other people. So we're like, oh, that hurt my feelings. If you ever hear people say that, that means probably they're empty, alone, or afraid. And they feel like they need something. They need you to show up a certain way. They need you to make them feel better. They're just empty. Doesn't mean anything about them as people. Doesn't mean anything about you as a person. So expressing disappointment, and really watch this with your children, because remember what they're hearing. And a lot of people use that as a tactic to get their kids to do what they want. So I'm saying it can have lasting impact on your children. So just watch it. When you do it, correct it. Say, oh my gosh, I noticed that I did this thing, and I want you to know I love you no matter what. No matter what. You can't do it wrong. What kid wouldn't want to hear that? You can't do it wrong. What planet am I on? I'm criticizing somebody else, insisting on being right. Oh my gosh, I've talked about that a lot of times. Sighs and other nonverbals like eye rolling, like, or rolling your eyes when someone's talking. Interrupting them is an attack, which is interesting because a lot of us do that. We just do it naturally, especially in some families or cultures where it's considered normal. It really diminishes other people. It says, what you're saying is not important to me. What I'm saying is more important. So we just get to be aware of that when we do it and say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I noticed I did that. And what you have to say is important to me. I want to hear it. So in real love meetings, there's one speaker at a time. Nobody else talks. It's like in Native American traditions where they have a talking stick. Whoever has the stick has the floor. Nobody else is allowed to speak as long as someone else has that talking stick. So it's just like that. Passive aggressive behaviors like forgetting, like when you really didn't forget. That's why I have it in quotes. So like, oh, I forgot that we were supposed to go out tonight, or I forgot to take the garbage out, or it's an attack. It's like, screw you. I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. You don't matter to me. This one is a big one because we don't think about it. Defending ourselves. So anytime you defend yourself, someone attacks you and you defend yourself, what are you saying to that person? You're saying, nope, you're wrong, which is an attack. So it's really, this one's challenging when someone's like in your face attacking you, to just say, okay, thank you for telling me that, or not to defend yourself. Because when people defend themselves too, don't you just think they're guilty? You're like, okay. So what I love, one of my analogies that I like to use is, what if somebody called you an accountant and you're an attorney? You'd be like, okay, whatever. Like it has no charge. There's nothing in your body. You don't defend it. You're like, okay, whatever you say. But what if someone calls you a bitch? You'd be like, oh, how dare you? How dare you? Right? Because that one has some teeth. That one hurts. All right. Acting like a victim. Oh my gosh. Okay. So acting like we have no control, blaming others for our unhappiness, because being a victim is, you have no control over anything. Everything is outside of you, and nothing could be further from the truth. But a lot of people get street cred. This is how they get that imitation love. If they act like a victim, people come and rescue them. So grudgingly going along, and then they can also be a martyr. Acting like there's no solution or they're powerless. And you'll see people that are addicted to these emotions of being a victim. They will attract car accidents, they attract injuries, they attract illnesses. It's insane, but it's all unconscious, right? So they have a way to get attention. Also acting like they're not appreciated. Clinging. So this one's interesting. So it's using emotions to control another person, thinking that you need another person's time or presence to be happy. Like, I can't be happy without my child or my mate, whoever it is. Like, just thinking that you're lacking, needy. Excessive gratitude or flattery. Oh, this is one of my pet peeves, I got to be honest. People that talk on and on to get and keep attention. They're clinging. They're afraid if they stop the conversation, you'll leave. And a lot of times you can't get a word in edgewise. So for me, people that are using this behavior are the most exhausting for me to be around. And all of these behaviors do the opposite of what we want. When people are engaging in these behaviors, it's like a repellent, like, don't love me. I'm not lovable. I'm not lovable. Come back. Love me. Don't leave me. Acting helpless without the other person, telling people how much we need them. So a lot of times parents will do this with their children, and that's a lot of pressure to put on them. And when they turn 18, most of them leave home and do not want to come back. So you get to become aware when you're doing these things. And we all have a couple that are our go-tos. Running was mine. That was a big one. Leaving mentally or physically when there's conflict or tension. This was me all the time. And I would feel like my brain actually physically shut down. Like, I call it like a freeze response, because I couldn't even form cohesive thoughts. If I felt, like someone was mad at me or was going to leave me or something like that, I would just like want to curl up in a ball and hide, or I'd physically take off. I would leave. This is also the one when we escape into addictions: alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex, whatever it is. They're all addictions, video games. So it's escaping from reality for a little while. You're running away from reality, going to some other place where it feels better. Not speaking, withholding yourself from others. Oversleeping. That's interesting, because a lot of times when we don't want to confront reality, we get really tired. So this is another running behavior. Changing the subject. Yeah. Overworking or being busy or in constant motion. So those are the behaviors. So what you want to do is just watch for them, notice them like, oh, interesting. And then those are the things that you get to start telling your trusted friends about. Like, oh my gosh, I noticed that when I feel scared, I cling to people. And the behavior that I use is talking on and on to get and keep attention or whatever it is for you. So when you make these calls to people, you want to tell them like which behaviors you're using and let them ask you some questions. And one of the best questions at the end is, okay, when this comes up again, what will you do differently next time? What could you do differently? So if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? So it's always good to self-evaluate from a higher perspective where you're not judging, you're just observing. And it's all objective because it is. And all of this stuff is below your level of consciousness. So until you look for it, you will never see this. You've never noticed probably before that you do these things. Now you will, because I brought them up and brought them to your attention. So the first part of this noticing is so uncomfortable. It's like, oh my gosh, I do this all the time. And in my head, I'd be like, I'm a piece of crap. Like, oh gosh, I must be exhausting to be around. Look at me acting like a victim. All the things, but we all do them. We all do. We just have different flavors of which ones are our go-tos. And so the first part is like bringing it to your conscious awareness. Like, okay, I see I'm doing this. And it takes a little while, at least it did for me, to notice after I had done them. But at some point, you're going to start noticing before you do these behaviors, before you engage in them. And then you have a choice. And you're like, oh my gosh, I almost used my emotions to manipulate somebody. And I didn't. And then you get to celebrate. So in the beginning, you get to celebrate that you noticed that you did these things, because even noticing them is way better than you were doing before, right? It's the only way to change these things. And you get to start getting real love. You get to start being seen in your messiness because you're lovable there. You're lovable no matter what. Yes. And then you notice them before you do them. And then after a while, after noticing them and interjecting before you do these behaviors for a while, after you keep noticing and noticing, you won't do them anymore. You'll just be so conscious that it doesn't even come anymore. You're like, I'll just be honest. Instead of trying to get something or trying to protect myself, I'll just be honest because I'm safe. I am safe. I have people that love me and accept me exactly as I am. So I can say whatever I want. If this person doesn't accept me, these 10 people will. They do. So there's such freedom involved once you get this down. So practice, practice, practice. Find your network. And if you would like support with this, that is another one of my superpowers, is unconditionally loving people. I don't need people to be any different. I have clients that yell at me and they're like, you're a jerk or whatever. I'm like, okay, I don't need to be liked. I love you anyway. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to be inauthentic. You don't need to pretend that you like me or be nice for me to love you. I have capacity to love. It's because I allow people to love me. So if you are interested in that type of somebody really seeing you and holding space, I invite you to book a call with me, and you can talk about your behaviors. You could talk about the things that you don't want people to know about you, and I'll hold space for you. So if you would like that type of support, just go to connectwithkaren.us, connectwithkaren.us, and we'll just hop on a call and we'll chat. We'll just keep it real. So thank you so much for watching. Remember, there is not a single thing you can do to make yourself any more worthy of love. And there's not a single thing you can do to make yourself any less worthy of love. You are just plain worthy, no matter what. You are a human being, not a human doing. You can't earn it. You just are. Love you so much. Thank you for watching. Mwah!